All right, well, let's get started with our final session, final formal session of the mEducation Alliance Symposium. I'm thrilled that so many of you are joining us for, I was just telling my colleagues here how excited I am that all of them are able to join us for this morning session. And a great credit to Jon-Paul for introducing Warren, Brian, and Chris. When I was saying, like, really looking for dynamic speakers who could talk about the importance of play and education, both tech and non-tech. And he said, oh, you absolutely must contact these individuals, all of whom immediately responded saying that they would participate in this symposium. And then Julius, for your participation from Kampala, that we had heard about your initiative a number of months ago, and we're thrilled that you agreed to be one of our showcase speakers as well. We'll be following the same format as the other sessions, roundtable sessions of the symposia, that I'll be giving each of our presenters approximately 7 minutes or so to speak. We'll be providing brief introductions to them, and then really have the time to have dialogue among ourselves with participants. Feel free to drop questions into the chat. We'll incorporate those as we go along. I want to introduce Scott Isbrand, who you had heard from yesterday, who will be co-moderator for this session. Hey,
Hi,
Scott.
everybody. Good to see you all.
Thanks for joining us, Scott, as well. So I'm going to start with just a brief introduction for Warren Buckleitner. And Warren, you're joining us from New Jersey, so thanks so much. I guess we have a very strong East Coast representation with New Jersey, New York, and Uganda, Washington, D.C. all represented. So exciting to have the East part of the world represented. And Warren, assistant professor of, and Warren, you have to help me here, IMM department at College of New Jersey. You're also the editor of the Children's Technology Review, engaged in Dust or Magic. I have a number of questions that I'll just put out there, including methods of Fred Rogers. So Warren, I don't know if you'll get to that in terms of your presentation, but that will definitely be a question that will be coming to you. What does IMM stand for?
It's Interactive Multimedia.
Okay. Well, Warren, thanks so much for joining us. Again, lots of arrows of points ended up saying you must invite Warren, so we're delighted you could join us. And to turn the floor over to you, I would ask the other presenters, if you're not speaking, please just maybe minimize your video, and I'll do the same. And then Warren, I'll come back in a minute or so before the 7 minutes. But again, as a showcase speaker, I know there's lots that you could share with the audience. So over to you.
Okay, no pressure, Anthony. I'll do my best. And thanks, JP, for making that connection. I'm going to go ahead and go to my Google Slides. Can you guys see them okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I'm going to cruise through here. As Anthony said, I wear several hats, but at my core, I'm a reviewer and a teacher. I was a public school teacher in Michigan and taught preschool and worked for 10 years at the High Scope Educational Research Foundation in Ypsilanti, Michigan. Let's hear a big cheer out there for High Scopers, which is basically applied constructivism. Earned my doctorate from Michigan State, master's from Pacific Oaks College in Human Development, and so I'm kind of a mess in many ways from an academic point of view, but always a practitioner. And in the 1990s, I started Children's Technology Review, reviewing products because I just didn't see anybody out describing everything that was out there. And today, as of today, I've reviewed over 16,000 commercial products. I've always thought that the software tells the story. Each software product, which now is an app or video game or toy, is a dot, and from those dots you can make patterns. And then in 2001, I started a conference called Dust or Magic, and that's from a quote that an idea can turn from dust to magic depending on the talent that rubs against it. And I thought that applied well to interactive media because I saw really brilliant work coming out of very talented individuals. When I was at, 3 years ago, I became a senior fellow at the Fred Rogers Center in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. It's a role that I'm extremely proud of. And I started a class at TCNJ called The Methods of Fred Rogers for college undergraduates. And I really believe that we need Fred a lot. So when I'm thinking about what I was going to do today, I thought I would share some tidbits from that class. So that's Children's Technology Review. It's a subscription-only a service, and I'm going to give you a link to it at the end if you stick with me. So about last March, I was asked by the Joan Gans Cooney Center to write an essay on what will change as a result of the pandemic. And so I wrote this essay, and I'll just highlight a couple of points here that there's basically good news and bad news. Good news is that it took a microscopic virus to accomplish what years of in-service sessions couldn't, to move nearly every educator in the world into a distance learning mode in a few weeks, as we are now doing. And there are those of us that are lucky and those of us that aren't. I was lucky at the time because I already lived in a world of technology, but what happened is the bad news. And the bad news is that the coronavirus gave us a stark digital divide. There are many people right now that are left behind, both educators as well as just people. And when I was going through this essay, I was thinking that we really need a new Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And at the low level of that hierarchy are things like housing and shelter and, of course, toilet paper, the big shortages. And now included in that are Wi-Fi and a laptop maybe, because you need that to survive. So the class that I started teaching over a year ago now has been a really wonderful experience. And there's some resources here. You guys, just if you want to get smart on Fred Rogers, I highly recommend for watching the documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor? I like it more than the Tom Hanks movie. And get Max King's book, The Good Neighbor. That's the textbook for the class. And it's really a great deep dive in the life of Fred Rogers. So in thinking about what I could tell you in 7 minutes, and I know I only have 4 minutes left, so don't worry. Fred thought of every child as one little buckaroo. That came from an entertainer, Gabby Hayes. And that's kind of how we all have to think of every child on the other side of that screen, and understand that there's a sacred space between you and that child that needs to be respected. And that's important because there is a culture of manipulation that has happened, which I'll talk about in farther down the slides here, that I see that's pervasive in children's interactive media. In other words, there's a lot of manipulation going on, and as a reviewer, I'm concerned about it. I've been talking about it for a long time. I've been yelling at Apple and Google and people who sell apps, and I worry about that. And I think that we should think about what Fred would do if he were alive today, and that is would follow these six ingredients for making a product. Am I doing okay, Anthony?
Yeah, actually, Warren, plenty of time. So please feel free to take your time.
I'm in East Coast, so I have a tendency to hurry. So
no worries at all.
So the guiding question for all of us right now is, what would Fred say about the iPad? And let's just, the iPad is a metaphor for any connected device these days. And it's fun to do this exercise with a lot of theorists like Jean Piaget, like B.F. Skinner, like Maslow, like Lev Vygotsky. I think that it's a great exercise to apply old theories to new media. And I think that is, if there's one thing I could say, take from this, we have already a good theoretical toolkit to understand how to use new media for play and for learning. So that's what I do. That's my recipe. And in this case, I think Fred would have a lot to say on the ethical side of how social media and interactive media is going here. And I actually asked David Newell the question, what might Fred Rogers say about today's technology? And this is what he said.
Forward, and we're talking about devices like this, technologies.
Yes.
This is an iPod Touch, multi-touch. It has Wi-Fi. What would Fred say about this technology? Do you have any ideas?
Yeah, I think he's put in the same category that he thought of television. At one point, he didn't like television for children. He says one of the worst things we've ever done for our kids, television, because of what was on it. Mm-hmm. But content was so important to him, but it was a way of getting that content out. You know, you could write books to your blue in the face, and you don't reach as many people as you do with television, and now with this. But what goes into this is
so important. it's really simple, isn't it?
It really is. It's for Fred. I don't know what other people would think. Technology was a vehicle. Television was a vehicle for Fred. This would be a vehicle for Fred.
So you can watch the rest of David's brilliant words there on YouTube. Technology is a vehicle, and it really is simple. But there is good news and bad news in children's interactive media from my perspective as a reviewer. And so the bad news is, if you've seen the video on Netflix, The Social Dilemma, there is a culture of manipulation that is interactive in interactive media. And it's not all products, but there's a lot of products that see children as a commodity. And I think that we need to understand that, and it's more important than ever to take the values of Fred Rogers and use these new tools that are incredibly powerful to make goodness attractive. It's really a simple idea, but we have to keep the focus. There is also still a huge false dichotomy problem in the children's digital media space. People see it as either screen time or no screen time. When I hear those words, I want to pull my hair out. It's much more nuanced than that. What is a screen? Is a smart speaker a screen? I mean, and there are smart, good people making silly mistakes right now, and a lot of people with a lot of education who I can't believe I hear what they say. There's so much wasted potential in what these devices can do. The good news is Moore's Law is working. We have cheaper, better, faster devices. We can actually use social media technologies to track children and assess them and discover their potential. So the same tools that are being criticized in The Social Dilemma can be used for good things for children. And there are more good quality, developmentally appropriate choices out there than ever before. We just need to get to them. So choose your apps carefully. In the last issue of Children's Technology Review, I wrote an overview and provided a bunch of lists that are handpicked. So all of these links work, and I gave a password here, so you can log in with the name of the conference. The password is pandemic, and that will get you in for full access to these lists. And that's the best thing I can contribute to this conversation, is rather than a theoretical tirade about what we should and shouldn't be doing, is, hey guys, here's some awesome products. And I can put my stamp of approval. And I think, I don't speak for Fred Rogers, but I think Fred would like these products. So that's what I have. Two last quotes. These are from Fred. Make goodness attractive. That's the real job. Down to earth, actual goodness. That's what changes the world. When somebody gets that idea, that's when he was on the Charlie Rose Show. And then, according to Joanne Rogers, there was a quote that Fred carried around with him. So I'd like, you guys can carry this around as well. I carry it with me in my brain, and that it's especially important right now, given the political climate in the United States. And that is, there isn't anybody you couldn't love once you've heard their story. So I leave you with that. I'll turn it back over.
Thank you, Warren. Warren, that was terrific. I have a number of questions. I'm going to encourage folks that had just heard it again. Feel free to drop your question in the chat now, or when we're done, please hold that. yeah, Warren, there's such richness for us to explore in our Q&A session. So we're delighted that you were able to kick us off with all your great work in this space, but words of wisdom from Mr. Rogers as well. So thank you. All right, at this point, I'd like to invite Jon-Paul Dyson to join. So maybe Warren, take your screen off, and then I'm going to take my screen off just to create more space for your video clip. Jon-Paul, it was a pleasure meeting you. I think I first heard about the Museum of Play a year ago when we were thinking about hosting the symposia at the Kennedy Center, and was delighted to hear about the Strong Museum of Play, including potentially your participating in person. Well, as it so happens, it's virtual. And I know that that has been one of the issues that your museum had transitioned with in light of COVID quite capably. But what's really interesting is your background as the director of the International Center for the History of Electronic Games. I'm sure there will be lots of questions. But also, I think you're the first vice president for exhibits I've ever spoken. So I'm sure just in terms of how important it is to be able to display and the richness of all the stuff that the Strong Museum of Play has, including all the resources on your site. So let me just turn it over to you, Jon-Paul. Welcome, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Anthony, and hopefully I can get the screen sharing to work. Is that showing up there? Let me see.
Yes, it is.
Okay, can you actually see the slides?
Yes, we can. There you go. Just want to put it on present so it fills up the whole screen.
So the challenges of the last minute switch to Google Slides from there, present. Okay. Showing despite being the director of the International Center for the History of Electronic Games, technology still has the capacity to flummox me sometimes. So thanks for the introduction. And I'm going to go quickly through and just give an overview of the Strong and try to touch a little bit on some of the issues that we think of as we deal with things and think about play. So, and again, I apologize for the distortion here because of the last minute switch to Google Slides, but you can see we're a large place, 285,000 square feet. So I guess that's about 27,000 square meters. And we're in Rochester, New York. And for those of you who don't know where Rochester is, I like to throw this in there. So closer to Toronto or Niagara Falls, actually, than to New York City by a significant measure. And we're all about play. So we have the world's most comprehensive play collection, more than 500,000 objects here. I threw a few of them up here. One, for instance, on the upper left is the original prototype for Monopoly, the board game that is so significant, not only in American culture, but also I think around the world. And also speaks a lot about the values that games play can encourage. And I think it's one of the things we think a lot about here. You know, one of my titles is director of the International Center for the History of Electronic Games. And we've thought a lot about video games and how do video games change play? How do they represent a continuity of play? And how do they sort of operate in our society? So we have for instance, more than 300 arcade games and pinball games at the museum, which are a lot of fun for those of you who remember those. And we also have more than 60,000 video games in general, video game related artifacts. Warren, in fact, has donated quite a few representative children's games. And we'll talk more about those. Technology, of course, is not new. And that's one of the points I often make is that digital technology is just one most recent example of how technology has been applied successfully or unsuccessfully to play. This is an unsuccessful version. This is Thomas Edison's talking doll, which is which was truly horrid in its application, used wax cylinders, and it broke easily and a hard, unyielding body. So failed in a whole variety of measures for toy design. Mystery Date Game is another set of example of our board game collection, which is massive. I know Chris and Brian will be talking about that similarly. And also we are home of the Brian Sutton Smith Library and Archives. Many of you may be familiar with Brian's work. He was a foremost play scholar of the late 20th century. And we have his archives as well as many other key people involved in the creation of games. These are the papers of Sid Saxon, who is a pioneering game designer, but also people like Vivian Paley, for instance, Leila Gandini, who is the American representative of the Reggio Emilia method of education. We do interactive hands-on exhibits. They get about 600,000 guests a year. And one thing I want to say about collections, we do also offer fellowships as well for people researching play. And so that's key. We have many programs, including the National Toy Hall of Fame, which will be inducting the toys soon in beginning November, the latest class, the World Video Game Hall of Fame. The Woodbury School, which is a Reggio Emilia inspired school, in which we really try to take those principles for a play-based approach. And then the International Center for the History of Electronic Games, which really grew out of our recognition that play was changing, and yet play was also the same. And so how do we represent this new digital realm of play, and in such a way that 100 years from now, people will understand how play evolved during this era, how games arose. And so we have hundreds of thousands of archival materials from key developers of play and key people, including the first educational games back in the 1960s, computer educational games. And we publish a journal, the American Journal of Play, which is an online journal, which is open to the public. It's peer reviewed, and we invite submissions, and we look at a wide variety of play from an anthropological perspective, educational, biological, cultural, historical, and it's a wonderful resource for anyone interested in play and how it's changing. So I just want to touch briefly with some thoughts of what is play. And there are obviously many ways of looking at play. We think of someone like Huizinga, who talks about play as fun, as voluntary, as its own end. Another way is of thinking of play as a process that begins in anticipation, that yields surprise, generates pleasure, which develops understanding, builds strength, and enhances poise. And I think this is a roller coaster experience of play, with the anticipation of going up the hill, and then the surprise going over the edge, and then the pleasure at going down, and the realization that you're not going to die, and you come stronger to the next one. So one way of looking at play that we developed here, we call it the elements of play. And it yields that question, who plays? And so one of the things we hold very truly is that play is universal. And I often talk sometimes actually plays in the animal kingdom as well. I think as people recognize, anyone who's had a dog or a cat. But it's from babies all the way up to adults, seniors. And it's universal across all societies and culture. And so there's this universality of play that really is important. And it gets at fundamental issues of why play happens. I'm not going to go into each of these, but play is essential for human development. And it is one of those aspects of learning that really prepares us well, both as children, but also sustains us as adults. One of my favorite pieces is that a way of thinking of it is that increases flexibility. For instance, we're able to react to surprise situations much better when we are playing, when we have an experience of play. And this is true again of the animal kingdom, that gazelle that's dodging around and playing is much better able to escape the lion. And it's true for us now when we face unexpected circumstances like what we're going through right now with the COVID situation. And there's some really interesting research. I'm happy to dialogue with anyone about the research that undergirds each of these statements here as well. But we're also interested in how is play changing. And again, what is the continuity? What is the change? And so you just think of some things. You take a dollhouse play in the left and the upper, to the game like The Sims, or a game of Sandlot baseball playing on the Wii. How does play change across society and culture, with technology, Warren referenced Moore's law, with economy, as economies change, it's become more prosperous. But then also, how does it stay the same? How is play fundamentally the same, even as it changes with these things? How is imaginative play or construction play similar between a dollhouse and The Sims, or the physical play or the competitive play similar between a game of Sandlot baseball and a game on Wii Sports? So happy to please contact me. And thank you. And you can, and I look forward to chatting more. So.
Muted. You need to hit the microphone button there.
Jon-Paul was just saying that I'm glad that you weren't a soccer dad when I was a soccer dad, because parents would want to talk to you and invite you to their school. So just in terms of how great to have the role and relationship that you have with the Strong Museum of Play, thanks for walking us through that. So next, I'd like to invite Dr. Christopher Harris to join us. Chris, thanks for joining us in the symposium the last few days in general and your contributions. And you're the director of the School Library Systems for the Genesee Valley Educational Partnership, an educational services agency supporting the libraries of 22 small rural districts in Western New York. Chris, I also know that you and Brian, I think, were co-authors of a book of Libraries Got Game, if I'm not mistaken. And really important to be able to talk about the role of libraries as well, just in terms of an important audience. But to turn it over to you now, Chris, and delighted to hear your comments.
Thanks. And I actually enlisted Brian to be my link buddy, so he's going to drop some links in the chat if you want to follow along, rather than trying to mess with a slide presentation. So yeah, to start out, I do have to give a shout out to the Strong Museum of Play, because I'm a member of their Playmakers Leadership Council, which is an associate board there at the museum. And it is a wonderful place. And let me add my recommendation to those in the chat, saying if you're ever in the Western New York region, it is a great place to stop and visit. So by day, I am the director of a school library system. We are a New York State funded agency that supports school libraries. And really our job is to make them a little more awesome. I also do consulting and writing at my personal business, Learn, at playlearn.com. But what we're really here to talk about is the game library. So about 13 years ago, Brian Mayer, who worked on my team for about 12 years before he became director of his own school library system, we started a library of board games. And, you know, we're often asked, well, why board games? And, you know, Brian and I are both big computer gamers. We're big board gamers. We're both big computer gamers. But one of the big differences is when you're playing a board game, there's certain benefits. It really brings a level of equity of access. I think it can help overcome social distancing, because it is a very social interactive thing. Even if you're having to play online, using one of the sites that brings games online, there's a lot more social interaction sometimes than with some computer games. But most important for us, we were looking to use games in the instructional content areas. And so when you are using a computer game, and we've seen some wonderful, amazing computer games the last few days, but you're still, to some extent, abdicating your role as the instructional leader to the designer, because the game does what the designer wanted the game to do, and you can't easily go in and manipulate and change the game. Even games that have gotten more easily moddable and better with mods, there still is an abdication of that instructional sort of responsibility. But with a board game, you can change it, you can modify it, you can really make it your own and bring it fully into what you're doing as the instructional leader, as the teacher. And so we always thought that was very important. One of the really big things that we get asked when we talk about the game library is, well, how do you pick the games? And it's not always, you know, perfect. We have a big shelf still of oopsies. Games that, oh yeah, we think this will work, and it turns out they just didn't work. They didn't work in the classroom. They didn't do what we thought they would do. They weren't aligned enough to curriculum standards. So when we're picking games, and we went over this a little bit more in the video that is available, we really just use the acronym GAME. And so number one, G, it's got to be a great game. That is just hands down. It has to be a good game. But number two, then after we pick the good games, we make sure that they align to content standards. And this is important. There was a study out of Singapore by Ko et al. A couple of years ago that looked at barriers to the use of games in classrooms in Singapore. And the first three barriers were the barriers to everything in education: time, resources, and funding. I mean, those are absolutely the barriers to everything. So let's set those aside and look at the fourth barrier. The fourth most prominent barrier was that a lack of direct instructional alignment. And I couldn't agree more. what we've done is, instead of saying, oh, this game is about critical thinking, or oh, this game encourages, collaboration and communication, we say, no, this game teaches the 4 factors of evolution, or this game teaches the causes that led up to the Revolutionary War. So we're talking about direct alignment to instructional content standards, and we can show this game, when you use it as an instructional resource in the classroom, will lead to student mastery of these specific instructional standards that are part of your classroom curriculum. And so I think that that's absolutely critical. The other reason why we bring the games out in terms of that instructional alignment is because it can really be very effective for teachers. Teachers can have a hard time with play sometimes, and so the games provide a scaffold to help them think about play. This is something that I really explored in my dissertation research, looking at the use of games and teacher confidence around computational thinking. And so we really wanted to look at, my research was really looking at, okay, can we build up teacher confidence more by bringing a board game in rather than bringing in a digital tool right from the beginning? So we pick great games, we align them, and Megan, I saw your question. Yeah, it's a process that we've developed over more than a decade of doing that. But it's just kind of a way that we view the games. We modify games, and so we actually change games to make sure that they fit into instruction time. So we may take some things out, we may change some rules, we may break the games up so they fit into classroom periods across a couple days. And then finally, the last thing we do is we evaluate sort of return on investment. And we say, well, is this a big game? And so it has to be really deeply aligned, or is it a small game that we can say, oh, you can use this? And so I just wanted to pull out 2 games real quick that are in our collection that I think really exemplify this. The first is Timeline. And Timeline is just a beautiful little simple itty bitty game. It's a little card game. You're just looking at cards with events in U.S. history, world history, events, whatever, and you're just putting them in order. It takes 15, 20 minutes to play. It's supposed to be competitive, but I've never really seen it. I've always seen it very cooperative when kids are playing. Versus a game like A Distant Plane, which is the second link Brian put up. A Distant Plane is an enormous game. And when we use this game, we go out and facilitate it for the teachers because it is a huge game. It goes very deeply into the U.S. war on terror in Afghanistan, and it presents all the different sides. And it is a messy game where you really have to look at the fact that for one side to win, other sides are going to lose. And then this is a very difficult thing. So where are we going next? We're looking at some game design. And so Brian's going to talk about it more, but because I have the physical artifact I wanted to show you, this is Program People. And Brian pulled this together with some duct tape and foam and boxes from where we ordered something off of Amazon, and cards and bits from a game that wore out in our collection and we got rid of. But the other big thing is, we've got these books that I did, and Brian was great and helped me with them on teaching through games. And so we've, I really started looking forward about how do we look at building up lesson plans, unit plans with primary source documents, questions, all the instructional resources that go around helping teachers see how the games can transition into use in the classroom. One of my more recent projects that I think extends beyond this as well is the Playful Classroom project with Rosen and Haba, which is a major German company, where we took Haba games and licensed the artwork and the characters and then wrote children's books to go along with the games, sort of extend the excitement that kids have with playing games, and then build it into literacy where they're now reading paired fiction and nonfiction texts that in the fiction texts use the characters from the games to really extend it. So that's what we've been up to, and I'm going to throw it over to Brian, and he's going to talk more about some of the work that we've been doing.
Thanks so much, Chris. Great overview. And Chris, one of the questions that I'm going to have, just to plug that, unplugged activities for future coders, that you're sort of looking at bridging sort of the linkages of pre-computational skills. And your website, both Brian and I put down as well for lots of resources. Well, Brian, it sounds like it's a great segue in terms of your role as the coordinator of the school library system and media services at Erie2 BOCES. And it's really exciting, in fact, that you were the 2015 Library Journal Mover and Shaker. So really exciting to hear about that as well. Turning it over to you, just in terms of your presentation. Thanks, Brian.
Not a problem. I'm going to try and share my screen. And I will say that when I get my PowerPoint going, I can't see anything. So I just want to make sure, can you see my PowerPoint?
Yep. Yes.
Do you see me too? Just out of curiosity?
Yep. Both.
All right.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much. I'll be talking a little bit and sharing with you sort of related to the work that I did when I was with Christopher. Like I said, I spent a little over a decade working with Christopher because we were sharing links. Here's a quick screenshot of the game library. So a lot of my time there was spent sort of curating and building the collection, pushing into the classroom, working with school librarians and classroom teachers to bring in modern style tabletop analog games to engage them with curriculum, to engage them with learning and growth. That sort of evolved into also including escape experiences. So I spent a number of years building custom escape experiences for students and working with them to do design work to create games and create escape experiences as sort of a way to have them showcase content, understanding, and mastery. And in the space of things, since we do the things that I did sort of shuffle, I have been fortunate enough to write a couple of books. The newest one in the bottom right-hand corner is about creating interactive stories in Twine, but it sort of starts in an analog format, which I'll talk a little bit about as well too. So I really wanted to spend my time sort of discussing some of the design work that I did with students and some of the approaches that I took so that hopefully you could take some ideas away from it to be able to use and implement where you are. And I wanted to start with that idea. You know, JP did a great conversation about some of what play is and some of what, you know, games are and makes it special. And I sort of want to add to the fact that I'm always impressed by the magic that sort of like underlies what games and what play are, because it really takes these sort of disparate things and transforms them in a way. Because if you think about, you know, what games are and what play often entails is you have these things, whether they be pieces of cardboard or plastic or paper or sprites on a screen, and you have these defined ways that we're meant to interact with them. And somehow the designers and the people that have put those together create something that sort of transcends beyond that into this experience that goes beyond the bits and the rules and has sort of an impact on us that we connect with and we engage with. And as educators, what's really great is we can tap into that and we can take a look at objectives that we might have, and we can leverage and utilize games as a way to provide context and meaning for the objectives that we're trying to achieve, as well as provide immersion and engagement. And you can flip that and allow students to sort of be a part of that process, to kind of go up the Bloome's sort of levels to synthesis and creation, where they're doing very complex creations of making, building, and designing games as a way to show what they know and what they understand about the context, about the curriculum and the things that they're doing. But oftentimes people are sort of unsure on where to start with games and with game design. And so I sort of wanted to give you sort of a way to ease yourself into the pool that has worked for me as I've done work with students. So one of the easiest ways to sort of dip your toe into the pool is doing some sort of like fix-it activity or exercise. And this is where you take sort of like a very simplified, vague sort of game like this, where this would be the game. So you have this board, your rules are to roll dice, move pawns, and get to the end. And you kind of present this to the students and say, okay, go for it, play the game, or try to fix the game. Because, you know, questions arise right away. Well, where do we stop? Which direction do we move? What happens if we land on somebody else? And this is really just meant to get those creative sort of juices flowing and to get kids thinking about and get their head into that design space and some of the choices that we start to make. Then you can sort of transition a little bit further and sort of get up to your hips and do redesign. And this is, again, The kids aren't really doing a lot of heavy lifting. They're not having to do original design work, but they're taking games that have already been made and designed, and they're sort of making modifications or making tweaks and adjustments. So it's building off of that fix-it model and goes a little bit deeper, where they're building a new board or coming up with a new theme or making some adjustments. But what it allows you to do is start having conversations about kind of those key aspects to game design that they need to think about. You know, you get to introduce the concepts of mechanisms, the things that you do to move play forward, the theme or the narrative that sort of kind of provides the story for the game, and also audience, which is an important aspect that oftentimes doesn't get covered. The fact that games are created for people, that you're creating games that then who they're for dictate some of the choices that you make. The language, the complexity, the graphics, and the imagery, all of those things kind of combine. And so those redesigns allow you to sort of have conversations and explore some of those key aspects. The great thing is there are a ton of games to sort of build that from. So earlier in the chat, we were sort of sharing the game collection WoW thing. This is actually the wall that I have out in my living room. So it's part of my game collection. But there is so many games that exist out there to be able to draw from and sort of take. But oftentimes people don't have access to them. And so you can use stories also as a way to kind of explore and do game design with students. And what I love about that is stories are universal. Stories transcend culture, they transcend language. We all have stories that we share. So you can take something like interactive narrative games. This is the Parsley game system created by Jared Sorensen, which is great because it takes the old textile adventures that were done on computers, but it does it in an analog format that so you don't actually need a computer, and you can do it for fiction and nonfiction. One of the projects that I started when I was working with Christopher was with middle school students. They did research on the Iroquois First Nation, and they built a knowledge wall of everything that they knew collectively about the Iroquois, and they used that knowledge wall to build these interactive stories about the Iroquois that drew from the people, the places, the culture, everything that they knew. But it was still game design. You still have to introduce and talk about interesting choices, decision points, obstacles and challenges, balance, and all of those things come into that process. It also is really nice because it builds a foundation for computational thinking and programming without computers and without learning code, because it introduces logic, causality, sequencing, and again, bringing that audience piece back. You know, it introduces, I'm always looking for resources that address computational thinking in different ways, and this does audience, which for a coder, and when you're doing coding, you're writing for two people. You're writing in the language of the machine for the machine, but you're creating an experience that goes beyond what you code, and you have to be aware of what you're creating for the end user. And this is a great resource that does that. And this is what it actually looks like. It's literally just a map with locations and how they connect to each other with some very focused sort of textual pieces that correspond to each location. So anyone's able to sort of create one of these experiences. And then you can do next steps by taking, and when you have that fixed interactive narrative, there are some great open source resources that allow you to program and code it online. For example, Twine is a great one that I like because it's very natural language based. You do most of your writing like you would normally write a story, but then you insert code snippets. And so that was sort of what I covered in that book that I just had come out from Rosen for interactive, took you from that analog to that digital aspect. It's just a great way to get kids creating games in a very sort of low tech way. Lastly, you can then go into the deep end and look at original design. We did a lot of original design work where the kids are coming up with their mechanisms, the themes, the audience. They're doing all of that themselves. Some quick tidbits on how to make that happen is, first, the kids need to play games. They need a foundation to build from, because we design from what we know. And so by giving kids a toolkit to come from, by introducing to different games that have different mechanisms and themes, that allows them to draw from things. And then let them take some time to brainstorm whatever they'd like to make a game about. Don't put limitations there. And then they pitch it to you and say, we're thinking about making a game about this. And you listen and you provide some direction and feedback. Allow them to go back and kind of sketch up what they want to make and repitch it. Let them prototype it and play test it. And then you sort of repeat going through that cycle of they pitch again, some more prototyping and play testing. And you go through that process until they get to something that is playable that they can share. And the great thing about, especially with, you know, in the analog space, case is that different students, different kids connect in different ways, and there are different sort of areas that kids can connect to if you have multiple kids sort of working on this in a group and to be a part of the process. Some kids could connect with the ideation, coming up with the idea, doing the research, finding out how this game that I want to make about renewable energy and how does that translate into like game mechanisms and the different ways that you play the game. Other kids can be involved in doing the graphics and the visual parts, thinking about accessibility, symbology. People can be involved in development in terms of the refining, the testing, the revision, the play testing, to getting the game from where it started as an idea to a more fully fleshed out thing. And lastly, well, not lastly, second lastly, editing is a whole nother animal. Writing rules, procedural language does not always match with the creative kind of game design person, and that's a whole specialized skill set in and of itself. And lastly, in the middle is math, because math is always about game design. You can't escape it. It's always there. So you have all these different ways that kids can kind of be engaged with the process. That is my 7 minutes. And so thanks very much for allowing me to sort of share a little bit more information about me. Where I'm at is there.
Thank you, Brian. And so, Brian, lots of going on as well in terms of the presentations, and absolutely terrific just in terms of the range of media, including not using media, that it all is fundamentally it's about a story. And so really look forward to the Q&A portion of this to drill down on some of the excellent points you've raised, Brian. All right, so our last showcase presenter, Julius, could you put your screen on, if possible? And Julius, delighted that you're joining us from Kampala, Uganda. And we know it's later there, so thrilled to have you join us. And with such a diverse background, that you're a biomedical engineer, a researcher, assistant lecturer at Makerere University. A number of years ago, I spent quite a bit of time in Uganda, so thrilled to have a representative from Uganda. And in addition to the product that you're talking about, Matica, in terms of this presentation, I also happen to know that you've been an innovator in other areas as well. So maybe that'll come up in terms of your conversation or your discussion points. I'd like to turn it over to you now, just to tell us about Matica and your background, and then look forward to having more of an opportunity to talk in our Q&A portion. Over to you, Julius.
Am I sharing
yes, you are.
The PowerPoint?
Well, we could see your computer screen, and now you want to click on the PowerPoint. Perfect. And then now put it in presentation mode.
That one?
Yep, we could see it.
Okay. I can't see you. I hope you can see me.
We could see you and your slides.
Okay, thank you. Like you said, I'm Julius Mugaga. I am an assistant lecturer and at the same time student at Makerere University. But a developer of several products. So we took on this initiative to see that we could also add at least something to the education sector. We come from a different perspective. We come from a perspective where some of the digital platforms are not deployable in our environments, maybe because of cost, or maybe because of connectivity, or something else, and even the culture itself. So Matica, which is a company now incorporated in 2019, was motivated by a product. Matica Limited is the company, and was motivated by the product Matica, which I will be elaborating more. The objective is to improve mathematics learning among school-going children, and also to promote love for the subject. And so the images of the cards you see in the sides, they are bearing number operators, the minus, division, addition, subtraction. They are the cards that I'm talking about. So the Matica card game is a novel, low-cost mathematics game. Of course, it's a card game, like the Patience, or what most people usually call the solitaire game. So it allows learners to have fun with mathematics while they play and socially interact with their teachers or parents, or even the peers. So this game, the little we've tried to test, it works well. We've not gone so much to test on the scientific parameters of improving critical thinking, but we've gone as far as seeing that the model works well, and they have the minimum play time to finish a game, and also the way kids get motivated. It cuts across. It can be played by any level, but it's beneficial purposely for learning between upper primary and lower secondary. So the game is made up of 46 cards. 36 cards are labeled with numbers 1 to 9. So in the camera, this is what I'm going to show. So let's assume now for 1 to 9, each will bear the different letters. The structure. Hope you can see that. And then we have unique cards. The unique cards are the ones that bear the root figure, and then we have those that bear the square figure. We have the zeros, which we call the markers. I think you could see them on the screen somewhere. There's somewhere where it is highlighted. I will pick it up when it comes. I can't find it in the so many cards I have here. Then we have cards that bear just a minus and then a plus. There are two for these special cards. So someone playing, they will have to decide on the total on table they are going to play. So you can play 2 or more in a game. So you shuffle randomly and share these cards randomly. So every time you play, because it's to motivate and to make learners appreciate math, you're supposed to mention the total on table, and it's meant to work. So we don't deal with the small figures. So if say you say that you want to play a total of 20, the person will put the first card like this one, which is a +1, and will say that the total on table is +1. So another one, maybe we'll put a multiplication 2 and it becomes 2. And then, but then the unique cards, some of the unique cards also have unique elements they bring in the game. For example, the plus or the minus card allows you to play more than one card when it is played as a sandwich. For example, if I arrange it like this. But there are some unique parameters we realize from this is that if we say +7, which is this, plus a card, -5, this is 2. So when you're playing this, you produce a total 2. So it makes kids think quicker. However, if we removed that and instead of a plus sandwich, we put a minus sandwich, this becomes 12, because now we have 7, which is here, and minus, and then minus. So it teaches them what happens when the minus is near minus, when the minus is near plus, and other things. So the image there gives a clear layout of the cards that are contained in the game. So there is chance that they will swing around the total decided on, up high and low down to the negatives, but there is probability that one person will put a card that adds up to the total they decided and will be the winner of the game. We took a very rigorous development stage process. We moved since 2017, when we were still students at Makerere, from our ideation stage. It was a little quicker because we were motivated and we looked to know what we wanted. So by the end of 2017 and early 2018, we had a proof of concept. But because of funds, we were slow in that year. So we kept on going through the development phases of refining, testing, refining. And then we had our company incorporated in 2019. And then the game itself being incorporated in the same year. So we started our piloting and implement optimization stages. Just this year, early this year, we were able to secure some small funding, and I will show just down what that small funding has enabled us to do. We also, during the same period, we were doing a market research. We made sure that this product is a human-centered sort of a product. So people helped us decide what they would offer for such a product, and they are offering about, just to convert to dollars, about $1.2. That's 5,000 Ugandan shillings. But then we were being challenged with the production cost because it was almost 3/4 in Uganda. But then the current production, we've managed to, using the 5,000 we got, we've managed to do production in China at half the cost of production in Uganda. So it is 1,500 Ugandan shillings. I don't have it offhand in dollars, but just know it is just a quarter of the selling price, if I could say, or just above a quarter. So this is now how it's going on. We're having a shipment that was loaded yesterday, and it's going to pass on the waters. So it will be coming to Uganda. I also want to get a learning process from it because it has to go through customs, and whether we shall get a waiver for tax or not, I don't know. We piloted in a number of schools, 15 primary schools and 10 secondary schools. Then one university in Uganda. We take these cards to social events. Like in the picture, you see people putting on the caps. Those who are not at school as such, they were just in their social event. And then they like the game. The circular one is the one for primary pupils in a remote village in Uganda, Mayuge. So in total, we've managed to impact 6,000 learners, but we think we can do much more if we could secure more resources to see that this game gets to the users. And with these 5,000 copies that are coming from China, we think we are going to devise better business models to see that our product reaches the people that it intends to serve. The current partners are segmented into NGOs, academic institutions, as the just ordinary schools, lower level schools, and distribution partners. Because I work in a university, I cannot go away from the university. So I work with Makerere and the mathematics department. But the professors in the math department, because for me I come from the biomedical engineering side, which is at the College of Sciences, have appreciated this game to the extent that they pushed it through to be incorporated in one of the math contests of the country that are organized by the Uganda Mathematics Society. We work with some schools that are there specifically to help us in the development process, not just a mere visiting for test and everything. They allow their kids to be part of the development cycle, and we test any stage that we reach at. So this is our team, the core team. We are a big team, but this is our core team. Just by look on the faces of those people, the average age is about 25 years for all the design team or the core team that is driving innovation. I want to thank everyone that has listened to me, and I'll be curious to hear their comments, questions, and everything. Thank you very much.
Julius, that was terrific, both in terms of telling the story, but your slides came through really visible as well. And I'm delighted that we've recorded this as well. And Julius, the amazing thing that you've been able to do with relatively modest resources and walking us through all the steps, including the pre-testing and currently the shipment being on the seas. So very excited to hear that. If I could ask all the presenters to come back on screen. And we have about 20 minutes or so for general Q&A. I'll start with just a question, but I see that there's been chat in the discussion as well. In fact, I'm actually going to start with one of the questions that was in the chat from Javana Fernandez. And Scott, I invite you to come on as well, just as another co-moderator. Thanks. And it was something that I was thinking of as well. Julius, you're already there, but the question was from Javana Fernandez, the philosophy that's been imparted about technology and play seems that you have to perhaps convince education authorities to integrate it into a formal education classroom because of the pressures that they have. Do you see any difficulties in translating sort of the general aspirations of infusion of play and games into a classroom if it's contextualized for a low resource setting? Perhaps your own experiences in regards to lower resource schools in the US. And of course, Julius, you have your own observations in regards to working with the Ministry of Education in Uganda. But let's just open that up in terms of, are they all translatable in terms of the concepts? And any recommendations for somebody making the case for inclusion of the type of resources you've talked about in a low resource setting? Who would like to start? So Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say, man, Julius, that is a great looking resource you've developed there. And that's what I do. look, there are teachers all over the country and all over the world that use games in their classroom. But what we set out to do with our game library, which has grown to be the largest in the United States, is to really address this at a systemic level, to make sure it's not just an individual teacher doing it, but that the curriculum directors, the principals, the heads of schools are adopting this philosophy. And we've done that by picking out very special games that absolutely, without question, help teachers teach and help students learn. And so, yeah, students, you learn what you play. And so when they're playing a math game, students are practicing with their math and they're engaged with the math. And, we can show that not just with math, which just by the basis of game design is sort of the easy, an easy target sometimes, but we have ones around science and social studies. And when we show them to curriculum people, when we show them to principals, they get it right away. Oh yeah, wow, that is absolutely about building up ionic bonds in chemistry. It totally is about that. And so then we get the buy-in. We're showing them we're not just playing the games, we're using the games as curriculum-aligned instructional resources. And so that's kind of the catchphrase that I always say, but it helps remind me that we have to be sometimes careful when we're talking with the uninitiated that, no, we're not just playing the game. We're using the game like we would a book or a DVD or a video or an article or any other type of resource coming from the library. We're adopting it as another type of interactive media. So that's where we've come from, from that sort of system perspective.
And just to piggyback off.
Thank you, Chris. Go ahead, Brian.
Back really quick too. I mean, and one of the key things, as Chris mentioned, when you're talking administrators, is you have to identify the curricular areas that it's targeting and hitting, unless you're naming specifically what standards it's addressing, because educators and teachers really need to hit those standards, especially here in the United States. They have a limited amount of time. And so unless you can say where it's hitting and why, and justifying, when we talk about that return on investment, why this resource meets those needs in a way that other resources wouldn't, that's critical and important as well too, because I can address this curriculum with more standard ways. Why is this game going to do it better? And that whole return on investment in terms of how much time does it take to introduce the game, to teach this new resource, to set up and to clean, that's a part of that conversation. And so you have to be able to justify the time and the energy and why this resource itself is better than something you would more traditionally use.
Thank you, Brian. Julius, from your perspective.
So I am going to offer two perspectives here. One important perspective is to us developers. I think we've also gotten to develop games, educational games that stretch outside the class and will not be limited to regulations. For example, the case of Matika that we made, it can be purchased by parents, it can be purchased by the schools. So depending on who wants the students to maximize their education, or the pupils to maximize their education time, so it will still work in the homes and in the schools. But then if I'm to share a perspective of the regulators of the education system all over the world, is that you also get to be like, at least be yourself, like try to put yourself in their shoes and feel it. How many games are we going to introduce on the national curriculum? So if that question is not answered, then you would not go on to poke them that they are not implementing such technologies. So what would be relevant now, like what they have done in Uganda for the recent, is to say game time should be earmarked on curriculum. So they do not specify the games. So if schools go ahead to identify that they think will be important for their kids, then they will implement it. So maybe from the persuasion from the developers or the distributors of a specific game, or the schools have identified the game by themselves, but the curriculum has left it open. It has only entrenched game time. And to see that they have entrenched this game time, they had even to pass a resolution when they are putting plans for reopening They said opening after COVID or the plan for the opening, they will first kill off for a moment the game and PE time to allow learners catch up with the lost time. Otherwise, it means that that time is being valued.
Julius, great points. Thanks
Anthony,
so much about.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just to build on, I think a point that I think both Julius and Chris Brown, in terms of same thing about games, and looking at this for the history of thousands of educational games going back hundreds of years in the museum. And I think one key thing when you look at the success of some is not only, I think what you're referencing in your initial question was how are you matching what the resources are, the particular setting which they're being used. It's not only what the game is about, but also the infrastructure that distributes the game and works with the administrations that function it. So we have at the museum, for instance, the archives of MEC, which is the Minnesota Education Computer Consortium. They created the computer game Oregon Trail. And one of the reasons they were so successful is they had a real knack for meeting the needs of school administrators and not just the game itself, but also giving them packages, curricula that would go along with it. And so I think you have thousands of games that are probably every year now that are being produced that are educational games. But I love the last slide that I think that Julius had, where he talked about the 4 different sort of areas, the NGOs he's working with, the school systems. I think educational products need to be thought of in this holistic manner, not just the game itself, but what are the systems in which they are being distributed and being played, and the needs that they're meeting at the user base. I just wanted to add that sort of broader perspective from a little bit seeing success and failure over time.
Great. Scott, turn it over to you for a question, then we'll go to the chat. But thanks for the responses.
Yeah, sounds good. No, I have a quick follow-up for Julius. I really want to delve into your point, Jon-Paul, just to go a little bit deeper. I wanted to ask the question that you had already asked Tony about integration with the national curriculum, and Julius, I think you already touched on that. But in terms of distribution, actually I lived in Uganda last year. I lived and worked last year, ironically, out in Luboa. But I'm interested to hear a bit more about how, I see kind of where you're going for longer-term strategies for in-classroom, but I'm so happy you mentioned at home distribution. I'm just wondering what the strategy is to let folks know, let parents know about this particular game. So what's your strategy for distribution, getting the word out, and where can people find it? I think that's an important thing to mention, what you're thinking about to get it in the households of different folks.
I hope that is directed to me, Scott.
Yeah.
We taking a multi-dimensional approach. In the past, we thought that the game was not moving to the market because maybe it was paper and people didn't know about it. And we thought developing an app was an approach. So we initiated that, but doing more further investigation, we realized that at first it was with us that we were not having enough copies that we could be responsive to our clients. Because if you went to our Facebook page, every time we make a post, there's about 10 people coming to ask, where do we find a copy? And there is even a question, a query that I've just answered from, I think, Nisha in Tanzania. She was like, how do I get this in Tanzania? Mm-hmm. So we having one of the online markets that is catching up in Uganda. I think it came from China, but it has some sort of origin from Nigeria, Jumia. And we are opening up some sort of store space on Jumia to see that everyone there can access. But we are also recruiting too when the shipment gets here and we've cleared everything, because we shall be having them in abundance. That I'm saying because we've never produced them at that level, not because there are too many, not so that like. But we are hiring 2 sales agents because the system of door-to-door vending is a perfect one in Uganda. So people keep on moving door-to-door to vend some of these games. Wow. But we are also cognizant that this is an education game. So we shall first be targeting specific institutions that would be willing to purchase this game before we get to the parents. Otherwise, we may ruin the value of the game if they start to see it being vended just on the streets.
No, that's great. Well, thank you, Julius. I have a quick comment and a question for Warren, actually. Warren, I think our paths might have crossed many years ago. I worked for 360 Kid with Scott Traylor and we did some media products for Fred Rogers, actually. I just wanted to say I really appreciated your comments. I'm a child of the 70s. I grew up with Fred Rogers. And then as a media production person, you know, I really think that there's a philosophy there. And, you know, when Fred passed, I'm wondering, you know, Fred treated play and creative learning like a public good. He revolutionized children's television. And now, you know, we have the power of many, many EdTech channels in the EdTech universe. I guess my question to you is how do we inspire the next generation of Fred Rogers-esque thought leaders, you know, and harness the positives of these many EdTech channels?
Thanks. Good to see you again. I guess part of getting older and surviving is you get to see friends again. So it's great to. I know like you guys, I really miss the human contact, and my students are the same. So thanks for that reunion. Yeah, I think I think the world is really hungry, particularly in the United States, and particularly my town in Flemington is hungry for the soothing ideas of Fred. And it's really humanism. What Fred Rogers was applied humanism. He applied it to media, but he was also child development. And these principles last, you know, these things are constants, and they cut across everything. And so my suggestion is that everyone should read Max King's book. Probably the easiest thing is to watch that video. If you haven't seen that documentary, you will cry a lot, but it's really helps you understand that Fred Rogers was more than this geeky sort of stodgy guy on TV that we all sort of think of. He was a master musician. I mean, his piano, he was a music major. And then he caught the need for this mission. So it's that mission that we all need to understand. And I think there's some good tools now. 20 years after he died, the tool of Max King's book, and then also the documentary, I think really will help us, capture what Fred was doing and get onto that mission.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Scott. Well, we have a few minutes left before the conclusion of this session. I will also say that there's a 15-minute break between the end of this session and our culminating sessions. So you invite any of the panelists to hang around on the screen if people would like to. Warren, you had said the point of being able to see people. So as a few of us drop off, you'll have a chance. But obviously, this has been one of the most attractive or popular sessions. You could see the buzz on the chat. So I'm curious, in just a word of wisdom, in terms of what our ambitions are for the mEducation Alliance and this conference in general, is to take some of these good practice lessons learned, whether, Julius, it's from a game developer and innovator, and it being a two-way street, just in terms of some of your experiences and how those could be shared with developers and advocates in the US. But likewise, with this body of knowledge that's represented by a number of the works that are represented by the folks in this panel. We want to help infuse this into a developing country context to make sure that it's deeper. So I'm wondering if you were riding on the elevator with the Minister of Education and you had like a minute basically to talk to him about the importance of games and play for impacting education in their countries, what would be the example that you'd like to give them, or the specific lesson that you'd like to share? And imagine building upon everybody likes to play. So I'm going to open it up with that. And then see if there's anybody that would like to take a first stab at that.
Well, I'm not sure this is a direct answer, but one of the things I was thinking of as you were talking, and maybe this ties into that, is we've been talking about games specifically, but I think it is good to look at the play lens more broadly, because games are one way that I think play operates. And I guess that leads to my second point, is that kids are natural players and they understand the technological possibilities of play much better, and also the play possibilities of technology. I think you can flip those much better in some ways than adults. So I would lean into the kids, see how they're playing with their devices. And I think mobile, we haven't really talked about, but mobile is going to have a huge impact. It's already having a huge impact in many places in the world. And I think it'll be nearly universal in some set period of time. We don't know when. So what are the play possibilities of phones, and how do those work together in classroom setting? And how do you sort of draw on the power of that without unleashing all the negative stuff that comes along with phones too? And so I think that's gonna be a real challenge, but lean into how the kids are playing, and that will be a guide, I think, for how the application of technology to education will be going forward. So you really need to be sensitive, I think, to what's happening on the ground with the kids.
Thanks, Jon-Paul.
I guess my take on it would be really, look, there have been a lot of great presentations the past couple of days about new technologies and ed tech for kids. And lo and behold, like every study you read, they've all been very successful with kids. Very successful. Why? Because pretty much any way you introduce technology to kids is probably going to be pretty successful. They soak it up like a sponge. If you just put it in a wall in India, they figure it out, they get it. But what about the teachers and the parents? And how are we going to bring them along for when the NGO or the university folks that are doing the study, when they leave? How do we make sure that the teacher is still an advocate and a teacher and still feels empowered to move forward to learning about ed tech and programming? That's where games come in, because I can show from my research that when we introduce it using a board game, it builds more confidence for teachers than when we start with a computer program. And the end result of learning is the same. But there are multiple research studies that show when you start with an analog board game type intervention first, that you have more confidence on the adults. Kids, it doesn't matter, but adults, and especially adult females, which are the majority of our teaching profession, it builds it along faster. And so that's why I think bringing games in and play, and specifically board games as a way to introduce this, is so critical.
Thanks, Chris. Warren,
So,
Brian, Julius? Go ahead, Julius.
Of all the things they have shared, some of the few issues I think we also need to think about is how do we innovate the games themselves, and at the same time we innovate the processes to allow them to be implemented, but at the same time to be regulated. How are we going to be to address the issues of addiction and misuse of games by the children? Now, for example, I'll take an example of the game like Matika. If it gets in the hands of the community and one community person who is already off the track starts to teach this kid that the game could be used for gambling, and the next day you find the kid is training other children in a school gambling on this game, how are you going to prevent it? So I think that's also some of the core issues we need to address when we are developing some of these technologies. We should not look on the better side. We should also look on the other side of the coin. But then finally, I want to say that the panel I've shared is such a great one, and I will be willing to detail, ask them questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Julius. Brian or Warren, any sort of closing thoughts or comments?
I guess, I mean, there's a lot of great things that have already been added here. I think part of, there's been a lot of discussion about, especially in the chat, conversations about sort of getting games to sort of translate from the educational space to home to sort of connect and stick with kids. And, one of the reasons that we all identify and enjoy the use of games is sort of the quality that they bring, that they're not passive, they're participatory, they draw people in, they engage them, they help us understand the world. They give us a platform for failure that is safe, that allows us to make modifications and adjust within an experience. There's all really good things. I think the thing, though, that I'd like to leave with is just, the importance of the quality of the gameplay. Chris talked about, needing to identify games that were good games that connect. And when we bring games into education, and a lot of the success I've seen sort of pivots around that aspect. Like if you think about English teachers who are working with students, Oftentimes they pick a good book. That book wasn't designed to be used in the classroom, but it was designed to be a great book that engages the students to read it. So I similarly, like drawing and bringing in games that have a good quality design to them allow us to tap into the inherent goodness that games and play bring, because the students authentically want to be engaged there. And then that translates to them seeking out that experience independently on their own, wanting to play that game after it's been played in the classroom. And if we've identified it for particular reasons that connect with curriculum, and then you have students that want to go off and continue to play independently on your own, that's an incredibly powerful resource and tool that we can tap into. Because oftentimes kids aren't like, hey, I really want to do that PowerPoint at home. Can I get more PowerPoints, or can I get more worksheets? So trying to balance, resources that connect to the curriculum but maintain that quality, I think, is critical to the success of sort of games and play in the education space.
Thanks, Brian. Warren, any sort of last words of wisdom? And Warren, I'm sorry we didn't have more of a chance to talk about dust or magic, but turning it over to you.
Well, I mean, what I would say, my closing words, I think, would be you've heard the word game used in many contexts, and I think that it's helpful. Jovan in the chat said that we have to keep playing as adults. Really, as David Newell said, who was Speedy Delivery guy, it really is simple. Have fun, play, and watch children. If I was stuck on an elevator with the Ministry of Education, what I would do is I'd put one of these on him or her, and I would start up Anne Frank House, and I would say, you're in that time and you're in that place, and you actually, you can be anywhere in the world and you can actually experience that spatially and hear it. You can hear the sounds of the streets outside. I mean, we have tools now that can reach children, reach all of us, and deliver narrative and deliver play that our previous generation could have only dreamed of. And it's our prerogative to start to figure it out and to tap into the potential so that we can enhance and delight and educate and entertain the next generation. So I think it's a big job. Fortunately, we all have master's degrees and we can do it. But my final word would be, I saw this guy at Hasbro. He said, die young and at old age. And I always like that.
That's great. Well, maybe a round of applause. I mean, I'll start for each of our presenters, and folks are welcome to add their own little emoticons in the chat as well. Really fitting ending of our formal sessions for the symposium. Many of us share a passion in this topic, and that's why being able to hear from those that have been so deeply embedded in this to provide their words of wisdom and to establish those connections. And we hope that all the panelists and Julius, your great work, that we could continue to keep in touch to forge linkages with our international interests as well. I think there's a lot of lessons that can flow both ways. So again, want to thank you all for joining us at the last session.